something I like that came on a little later in development that you did, Nels, here is we are without the radio, and I like how that feels across like the broad swath of the game. I think it's really cool to not just be alone. But there are these sort of reflexive Henry comments to himself based on things you're looking at. And the way those are tuned throughout here are really nice. Player, I don't know if you've seen this, but when you're walking sort of in the upper level of the cave, you can look down and to the right and you can see Brian Goodwin's shoe. And when you sort of like zoom in on that, Henry will just call out to someone if it is someone down there, someone in the cave. And Nell sort of like concocted that and put them all in the game, and we wrote some lines that worked for it, and they're not all over the place, but I really like the way it made the cave feel.
Yeah, it's actually kind of one of my favorite moments in the game in terms of Henry's monologue too, because we conceivably, even though Delilah can't hear you, like we could have hooked up the same normal radio interaction to where like you could make these dialogue choices and Henry just either monologues to himself or like talks into the radio even though we know Delilah can't hear him. But I don't remember. I might just like tried it on a whim. Maybe someone suggested it. I don't exactly remember. But just having those play automatically when you've been looking at a specific object or area of the cave for like anywhere between like half a second to 2 seconds, and then those kind of monologue moments show up, or when you perform a specific action like zooming, it feels very natural in a way that like little kind of auto monologue lines in games often don't. There's like a couple in the upper level of the cave and then a couple more down near the bottom when you actually find Brian's body. It was kind of a bummer that they came online so late and there aren't any other spots in the game where Henry doesn't have access to the radio, because I actually would have loved to have a few more of these in the game somewhere as well.
You're always thinking about like what design tools do I have to like change the pace or make you feel something different. And I don't think we realized they were a club we had in our bag until we had sort of like laid the whole game before us. We went,
Hi, it's Jane again, here with...
Me, Jake, hi.
So the way we work usually is that Jake will do a lot of the level design with gray boxing, and the cave is no different.
That's true. The cave is no different in that regard, but it is different in that it's ridiculous. Like the cave, Firewatch usually, when you're building it, you only have to worry about the floor, whereas the cave is a completely contained area. Like it's a cave. And I really wanted to take advantage of that, perhaps to an excessive degree. Like I really wanted the cave to feel like this snaking labyrinth that wove in and out of itself, and that you could see areas you were going to get to later from places you weren't at yet and stuff. But I had no idea if it would actually be allowed to exist inside of the rules of Firewatch until I handed it to you.
Well, the interesting thing about this cave is that, like, you know, for example, this hole where the shoe is, you can actually see all the way down to where the body is.
Yeah, you can't quite see the body because you can't lean far enough in. But
but the spaces all are actually connected in a way that makes sense.
The cave is also actually exceptional in that I think it's the only place in Firewatch where we cheat space.
Yes.
There's a couple places in the cave where you drop off a ledge, and in the middle of Henry's drop animation, we just cut the camera and like blink you to another area that's like a few hundred meters farther away.
Yeah.
Because the cave ended up being so weirdly nested on itself, it ended up being this like compact ball of yarn to the point that it didn't actually get you all the way to Brian's hideout.
Yeah, and so like to like make the space make sense while not spending too much time making it, we just decided, hey, I guess by cheating it a little, it's okay. And I don't think people actually notice.
It also cuts your travel time down. Like people were spending a long time walking through it in the early version of the gray box. But
figuring out how to light the cave, because like video game lighting, yes, but you still have to make sure there are spots opening up to the sky so that because we need to make sure that Henry can go through this without a flashlight.
Right. But it's also nice and dramatic to have those little cracks of sunlight coming through. It looks nice. But like, think about those torches.
Yeah, that's true.
Spike walls.
Or underground lake. How about that?
Almost
Almost made
Don't tell people about the lake.
Hey, it's Chris again.
Hey, it's Sean.
The entire Brian Goodwin saga changed absolutely massively, multiple times, really, over the course of the design and writing process. There was actually a previous design revision in which you as the player through just various means, could like trigger the discovery of the like existence of Brian Goodwin much earlier in the game, and we had to allow for like all these different possible branches of when you could find that out and when Delilah would tell you more information and so on and so on. And it became like a nightmarish possibility space that we really had to rein in.
It became just a very unwieldy story.
Yeah.
Inside of that story was the idea that Delilah didn't know who Brian Goodwin was.
Right.
She knew Ned Goodwin. He was a lookout who was out here, but did not know that he was here with a son because it was against the rules, and Ned had broken the rules by bringing his son out here. And from a design side, that was not to mention there's the unwieldy nature of the being able to never find out who he is until the very end, or figuring out that there was a kid in your tower on day one. That was unwieldy. And then furthermore, we were running out of tools to communicate the story of Brian Goodwin, because they were the only thing we had was the discovery of objects, which felt very one note and very
it
like,
felt very like breadcrummy.
exactly
Like, oh, there's all these this information you have to know in this order, so you're gonna find these things in that order, and there were too many of them, and it felt completely contrived.
And this is just a design philosophy. I think this is like a good story design philosophy, a good mechanics design philosophy when something just isn't working, is just ask yourself what happens if the opposite is true. I'll just say, okay, so what are the things that are true? Delilah didn't know there was a kid in the tower. I was like, well, what if she did? And not only did she did, she liked him. Oh my gosh, well that makes the emotional payload of finding Brian Goodwin like much more intense. And then once we had that, we had another design tool to like communicate about who Brian Goodwin was to you.
And that tool was the one tool we had for communicating information
Anything in the game,
anywhere
other
else
than
in the
finding
game.
something and Henry
Yeah.
going, oh. Yeah, we doubled the amount of information we could get to you, and it just made the game much more easy. It opened up the game from a story side, and it made us not have to constrain ourselves with that branching craziness of not knowing who he was and breadcrumbing you around the world.
And in doing so, it sort of simplified that total arc and allowed us to pack a lot more information into each of those deliveries. So when you find Brian's backpack, when you find his hideaway, each of those is like very information dense because we just consolidated it all to those zones.
And can reference the stuff you've learned along the way. So when you do find him, you actually feel like he's a human being who had a history and a life and a personality and stuff. And I'm really glad we got there.
Yeah, me
because
too.
we got there late, and you just
Very
don't
late.
know if it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You just don't know. We got there August, September.
Hey, it's Patrick and Nels here.
Hello.
You may have just found some role-playing game artifacts owned by Brian Goodwin, and I thought we could talk about the ways that this character evolved and actually ended up incorporating a lot of elements of our own super nerdy childhoods.
Oh, yes, that's exactly right.
Like Gladius Silva here was...
Good old Gladius Silva was actually the very first D&D character I ever made in probably grade 8, maybe grade 9. My very first D&D campaign. Some other friends of mine on the speech team, the speech and debate team, asked me to join their game, and I was very enamored that they invited me. So I had to make a cool character. So I made a half-elf ranger, and because I was a giant dorko and taking a Latin class at the time, I named him Gladius Silva, which of course means sword of the forest. And I remember when we were initially talking about, like giving Brian kind of this geeky kid personality to contrast with the fact that he's like out in the middle of the wilderness. And I recounted this anecdote about Gladius Silva. Everybody in the office thought it was quite hilarious. And because I had, for my own edification a while back, rescued that character sheet from like my parents' garage and then scanned it, I was able just to send over a PDF of that scanned character sheet, and then it more or less showed up exactly in the game.
Yeah, these are probably your original die rolls from that fated first campaign.
Oh, it was modified just the tiniest bit to like avoid Wizards of the Coast's Dungeons and Dragons copyright. Otherwise, that is literally just my dude. My favorite thing about Brian's proclivity for tabletop RPGs is in Henry's Tower in Two Forks, you can actually find a map that Brian made that's basically like a D&D-ification of the whole area that you're normally in.
Yeah, I ended up drawing that completely based on my own style of drawing when I was Brian's age, and Nels' age. When he was Gladius Silva, I was a city kid who moved to a more like suburban, like woodsy area at that age in my life, and I was so shocked to have all this like actual like woodsy terrain around me that I started mapping it with pencil and paper and, you know, drawing little legends just like Brian did, kind of turning the area into more of a mythical landscape. So as soon as this character had gelled, I knew that he would see Two Forks this way, and that cash boxes would be treasure chests and the Boy Scout camp would be a halfling village. And so it kind of just wrote itself.
Yeah, totally. That is our tiny tidbit of geek history in Firewatch by way of Brian Goodwin's Gladius Silva.
Hey, it's Chris again.
Hey, it's Sean, and you are in a clearing just beyond the body of a dead elk, and nearby there's a cassette tape from Dave to Ron. I get them confused the way I get
Yeah.
like lots of pairs of characters confused and things that I didn't write.
Yeah.
It's a recording of the song Ol Shoshone as performed and composed by Chris, who's sitting here, but as written by as performed in the fiction of the game by
Ron or Dave.
Based on the lyrics that are discoverable in the outhouse
Rest.
at
Oh, yeah,
Hawk's
yeah,
Rest,
yeah.
that were written by Raccoon Carter. I wrote the song as lyrics, and then the whole Ron Dave saga I left for myself till later.
You wrote those lyrics before we actually had the idea of making it a
Yeah.
real song in the game.
Exactly right.
Yeah. That whole arc collided with a totally separate design idea, which was to have a like a non-diegetic piece of music that was playing on top of the game at a particular moment. We really liked the idea of that generally. Have an actual song with singing and lyrics in it punctuate a particular moment. But we just never really landed on a song that we thought worked, or a particular way to integrate it into the narrative that like wasn't going to stomp on the open nature of the game. And it just we just sort of languished for a while until I guess it was your idea. I can't even remember too.
I remember it being my idea only because I remember being really bashful about it, because it was like I had never written a song before, and I really, really, really wanted you to compose music and record it. But like, I was worried that it was bad, and also like making your friend and coworker do this thing that you wouldn't tell me it was a bad idea. I was worried you wouldn't tell me it was a bad idea.
That's so funny because I read that as like you just didn't really.
Oh really?
I read that as like, oh, you can do this if you want, but I don't know if that's.
No, I just didn't want to like. It felt like so I've read a song and you're gonna perform it.
Right.
Like it just did not feel like I was like, oh. So I was really like feeling that like. Then when you delivered it, I would like start crying. I was like alone and just like got like welled up, and I was like, oh man, that feels good. And I was,
it was
really
so
excited
fun.
to play the game.
I was really happy to get to do that. On the
Oh
game.
good. I'm glad.
It was really
I didn't
fun.
know that.
Yeah.
Well, great.
Yeah, worked out.
And it's available on the soundtrack, which you can buy at thestore.camposanto.com or from our Steam page.
Hi, Jake again.
And Chris.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Jake. This area is one of the only areas in the game where we really let ourselves play up, sort of dressing a set in a really overtly theatrical and dramatic way. You know, this is the reveal of Brian's body was such a big moment that we kind of figured we should just go for it
Also,
entirely.
it was possible to do because I think this is one of the only places in Firewatch where the direction from which the player approaches and the time of day are 100% in our control. Like, you're only ever going to see this scenario under this circumstance. You're going to walk in and sort of the scene will reveal itself from this angle, and there's no chance that the sun is going to be setting in the middle of it or whatever else. So we leaned into it.
I kind of ran with that with the music as well. as you know, if you've listened to all the music in this game, I really didn't lean on big string swells or anything like that. It's very kind of small scale recordings, guitar and electric piano and bass and things like that. I decided to just push this as far as possible. I did have one odd thing with the music, which was instead of what you'd expect, which was making the music a really minor dark key, it's actually all in major, which is typically what people associate with happier, more upbeat music, but I pushed the strings far enough that I was hoping it would sort of come around the other side and make something that's kind of, I don't know, poignant.
It's cool. I like it.
Thanks.
Fun fact about this area: if you bring a notable Brian Goodwin possession down into this space, you can set it down next to him using the game's putback system.
One Russian streamer found that live on like the day the game came out.
Yeah, by accident, and it was
amazing.
That guy's stream blew up.
Yep.
I came up with this character, Delilah, and then just thrust her upon you and said, you are going to be Delilah in this video game. I liked working with you on The Walking Dead. You were amazing as Katya. How did that character come to life for you?
Well, actually, I think her name was Alice at first, if you'll recall.
Oh, no, it was.
You remember that?
Oh, it was Alice. Oh, no. What a hilarious thing to have to remember.
I remember getting that email from you about, hey, I'm writing a game, female protagonist, are you in? And I didn't even have to think twice about it. I knew whatever you're working on, whenever, throughout history and time, I will want to be a part of. But then you sent me the sides for Alice, and I got to read about this beautifully flawed but fun and self-engaged woman. And it's one of the things I love about the characters that you write is that they're actual people. They're not tropes. They're not stereotypes of anything. They're full-bodied people. And so I got to dig a little bit into my past and what's made me tick and what would make me take a job in the middle of nowhere and shamelessly flirt with somebody over a walkie-talkie and build her from there. The wonderful thing about Delilah is that there's actually a lot of me in her, meaning like I grew up in Idaho. There are a lot of mountains and wildfires and solitude and stuff like that. I left and I moved to Los Angeles and now I'm surrounded by concrete, but I kind of started out in the same place.
I was integrating so much of the way you speak and the way you like tell a joke or laugh just back into the character. Do you feel like you had to create that stuff to be Delilah, or were you making a concerted effort to sort of like become her?
I think it's a little bit of both. I am a bit of a smartass, and so a lot of the stuff that you wrote really lent itself to that. But as we started getting into the puns, wouldn't you liken to know and stuff like that, I was able to kind of sit back into this woman who just doesn't give a shit. She's out there in the middle of nowhere and having fun because this is her life. And so having that freedom to just be an idiot, it was really freeing. It was a lot of fun.
Plane?
No, I was just busy packing up.
Well, there's gonna be a lot more. The service says this thing is 2% contained.
Is this the big fire or the site fire or...
Well, the two fires merged into one unmitigated disaster. They're renaming it after my lookout. You about packed up?
Shouldn't we talk for a sec, about things?
About what?
We still don't know who was listening to us, who was following me around, who made that tape.
Yeah. All we have is the body of a dead boy who did nothing wrong.
But maybe we can still find these people.
Look, I think whoever is out there caused the site fire to cover their tracks, and I'm almost certain that when I get off the helicopter, I'm going to be led into a room and made to listen to a tape of me saying we started it.
And we don't know shit. What can I do?
Well, there's something for you to do. Holy shit.
Holy crap. Yeah, oh my god.
We don't know what it is. It could be nothing.
Yeah, it could also be whoever was listening to us, whoever made the tape.
Okay. Yeah, look, you should pack up everything you need in case we get the call and you can't come back.
All right, look, if something happens,
I'll remember you.
I was hoping you'd have a backup plan or something.
Yeah, okay, I'm probably gonna move to Canada. Ontario, maybe.
No, I meant if something happens to me.
Right, if you don't find out who made the tape and I have to hit the road.
Forget it.
Be safe, Henry. What's your status?
I think I'm getting close.
All right, well, I just got word that they are coming to get us. My place.
You sound worried.
No, it's just...
Brian?
I'll coordinate with the evac team and let you know when to head towards the tram. It's north. Far. Past where you found that cut back in May. There's an emergency tram out there that will let you hike to the rendezvous point at my lookout.
We're coming up on the end here, Jake.
It's true, we are.
You are about to hear, or have currently heard, the voice of Ned Goodwin, which we didn't know we were going to put into the game for a long, long time until we played it. Because originally it was like a note he left you.
We went back and forth early on, too. There was a moment, I think, where we said maybe one of the last conversations you'll have is with Ned Goodwin himself, who's off in the woods. Maybe you'll pick up the radio in his tower. Talked ourselves off that pretty quick, and then, yeah, maybe he leaves you a note, sort of a confessional note.
But then we also sort of bounced off the note because you would find it and it just didn't have the oomph and it didn't have the sort of cinematic nature of a conversation. And then we went, okay, well, is the response to that to like put Ned Goodwin in the scene? You're gonna meet the guy? And, like, thought about that for a minute. And then we said, well, you're gonna talk to him and like, what are you gonna say to him? And then we actually found the middle ground, which was a recorded note, which is like was really great. It was like the thing that it never occurred to us because we had written notes and conversations. The idea of just essentially having an audio log did not like jump out at us for a few weeks. And then it was like, oh wait, you have a tape player.
He's left you recordings of yourself before. It seemed,
yeah,
it seemed
it
like
all it all connected, and I'm really happy with where we landed with it. And also, Mac Brandt is the voice of Ned Goodwin. We had so many auditions, and this happens all the time. You get a lot of very similar auditions, people trying to play someone a certain way, and then Mac put a little bit of a like kind of an East Coast accent on it, and just
I remember not being sure about it at first, but you and Chris pushed for Mac, and I'm really glad that we did.
yeah, he was just a titan. He did
This is
such a great job.
a weird, goofy detail of just the sorts of things that you imagine in your head, but Goodwin leaving you this tape has meant that for me, my mental image of Ned Goodwin is that he has no one to talk to, but that like when he left the Shoshone, it was like with a backpack full of just tapes that he's recorded to himself, which obviously doesn't exist and the game doesn't say that, but
Right.
now like the existence of that tape just painted that strange character detail into my brain. Now that it's on this commentary, is definitely
Purely canon.
Canon.
Sorry about your wife.
It is Nels once again,
And Jane is back.
and we are here outside of Goodwin's bunker is what we ended up calling it. This is kind of the weird hideaway that Goodwin has been living in for the past 4 years, which some people may initially think, how could someone do that? That's unrealistic. But actually, we mentioned this briefly earlier in the commentary as well, but there was this man named Christopher Thomas Knight, who is also known as the main hermit or the last true hermit, and he was this dude who lived in the woods in central Maine for like over 30 years.
Wow, 30?
30 years, not 4, 30. To the point where he became like a folk tale that kids in the region were like, oh, behaved or the hermit will come take us away in the night. And everyone like did think, like stuff would go disappearing from people's houses or whatever, but it like almost everybody just thought it was, local naughty teens or whatever leaning into the legend. But there was actually this dude out in the middle of nowhere. And he had this insanely robustly stocked bunker. There's this great GQ piece all about it that had like diagrams of how he set up his bunker and where his different supplies were, and that was like a major inspiration for this area.
Part of why he could survive for so long was that he would keep raiding nearby homes and campsites, to get his supplies. And then he would hide all his trash basically in these like trash holes, I guess. So when we were designing this space, I was told, just like look at this article and diagram for some inspiration, and just make sure to have like piles of trash around. But the funny thing is, actually, it was kind of hard as a environment artist to just make a pile of trash. Okay, if I have to make a pile of trash, I now have to do the mental homework of thinking, well, what exactly could he have taken from where?
Exactly.
Because like even though it's just a pile of trash, but like what is actually in the trash and what I'm going to model kind of does need to make sense and needs to tell a story of like you can't just have random like TV sets, for example.
Yeah, or like a big old car tire or something.
Yeah, like that he wouldn't have stolen something like that.
And then the actual shape of the bunker itself, that was more based on these old Native American structures that are actually in Point Reyes, California. Oh. Jake, I think, had seen them or maybe been up there or something. But there were this tribe of Miwok Native Americans who built like these underground bunker smokehouse type things. The winters in Maine may be a bit cold, but obviously they don't compare in the least to the high altitude Wyoming national forests. So in all honesty, Goodwin probably should have froze to death like winter 1. Ended up way more like Christopher McCandless than the main hermit, but poetic license.
Yeah. And the cool thing, I guess, about this space too is if you go all the way to the end where there is a big window, if you look out there, you can see Henry's tower and also Delilah's tower. That's actually where both of those towers are. We didn't cheat it at all. So Jake did a really good job picking that spot for this bunker.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite moments where you get out to that opening and you realize that like not only has he been listening in, but he's literally been able to kind of watch you two the whole time.
Yeah.
You can kind of imagine in your head, like as Goodwin was listening on his conversation, he was like looking back and forth between the two towers as Henry and Delilah were talking.
Yeah.
It's a very wonderful voyeuristic moment.
Yeah. What a creepy dude.
Hi, Chris.
Hey, Sean.
So we are here in Ned Goodwin's survival bunker. Something you'll notice, dear player, is all of his like journalistic writings and logs are all over the walls, and you may or may not have read them. And you may or may not have read them because Firewatch isn't really a game that makes you passively digest written materials, like a game like Gone Home, or a game that tells all of its story through logs and journals you find around the world. And that was kind of a design challenge, as a lot of this game was, because so much, when you pick up an important note in Firewatch, Henry will sort of react, and then when you tell Delilah about it, he'll condense it down to a sentence or two about what the point of it is, and then they'll have a conversation about it. But that's not really on the table here, because the helicopter's coming and Henry and Delilah are sort of a little bit further apart. We kind of walked ourselves into a challenge of being able to check all the boxes about like who exactly was Ned and what exactly did he have his hand in, and then presenting you a scene that is completely passive to digest, which was difficult, I think.
Yeah, and part of the reason we have to do that is because in games that really lean on you reading a bunch of text throughout the world, generally speaking, those protagonists are either silent or they have prescribed responses to things. Our game is all the dialogue really is contingent on your choices, and so we can't assume you actually read all the words on the page. We basically had to make a call for each note, whether, okay, we're just going to let this player read it or not, or we're making the call that Henry explicitly read it in the fiction and he will state its contents or make explicit acknowledgement of like the useful information inside of it. And we just had to, and it just didn't, as you say, just in Goodwin's bunker, it didn't seem to make sense to require all of that. So we basically said, okay, regardless of what Henry does, we have to allow for the player to absorb all this stuff, and like we will put all the information in the story there. Like it's all there if you want to read it. You don't technically have to.
If you say so.
D?
Oh, fuck.
Is that a helicopter?
Yeah, hold on. Hey. No, there's one more. Yes, here, yeah. Yeah, he's coming. Okay, 1 second. Hey, they're here, but they're making rounds. They'll come back. I think I'm gonna go with them.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah?
I mean, it's dangerous here, and if anything were to happen, then that would be on me, so.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you sure that's okay?
I said it was.
Alright, I should go.
Have a safe flight.
Alright, have a safe hike.